specific session is for 2 hours. I mean, just introducing, the general plan of the whole thing. My name is Franco Augusto. I'm from Argentina, currently streaming from Bogota, Colombia, and I'm part of diverse movements and organizations. But I'm here kind of representing the global tapestry of alternatives. That is a kind of international process trying to bring together different initiatives and radical alternatives in the grassroots, and we intend to weave the weavers. What we mean with that is that we're trying to connect the different networks, regional networks that connects in some way these systemic change alternatives led by, vernacular grassroots people. So before we go further, I would like to briefly introduce this specific session that is entitled Climate Emergency and Species Extinction, Resist, Construct, and Celebrate. So basically, we're going to have around, I'm not sure the confirmed number of panelists, but we have 7 or 8 names that we will introduce in the first hour of the session. Each of them will have some time, around 7 minutes, to go around the session topic. That is basically, I could directly read the description, but I think most of you have seen that. But basically, this is about the main question of the session is how can popular movements do something about climate emergency, what are already doing, and specifically about the issue of species extinction. How can we work together in a local and international level to change that reality? So before we go into the panelists, I would like to give space to my co-chair, Arsi Passanen from Sweden, that she probably would like to introduce herself. Arsi?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Franco. And hello, everyone. My name is Archie Passanen, and I am based in Gothenburg, Sweden, and I am the head of board of the Transition Network Sweden. And the Transition Network is a grassroots movement that is involved in building regenerative and resilient local communities with respect and care for the diversity of species, people, thoughts, and ideas. And I'm very happy and humbled to be here with you today with these great speakers, as well as with my co-chair, Franco Augusto, and also with this very urgent topic for this session. And I would just like briefly to say about our work in the and culture in the transition movement, where we speak a lot of being a pro movement rather than a counter movement, because we try to be the wayfinders, explorers, experimenters, trying to find paths to a culture and a story that respects and honors the diversity of life on this planet. And that means stepping in, not pushing back, but going forward. And we believe that to construct regenerative local communities, and to borrow the words of Charles Eisenstein, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible is the resilience in resistance. And the slogan given by Transition Network International, that it's more a party than a protest march, reminds us to celebrate the beauty in times that demands everything of us. And I'm very excited to hear all the panelists with this topic, which is actually also a very painful topic, because this pain is real. My daughter actually cried yesterday because of the unfairness that only 4% of land-living mammals are wild. And she's growing up into a world where the diversity of life is taken away from us, and to a future with an escalating climate change. And this pain, as real as it is, it makes us scared, but it also speaks to our hearts. And when our hearts are spoken to, we need to act from our hearts. That is the meaning of the word courage, to act from the heart in order to resist, construct, and celebrate. So thank you again for inviting me here. And Franco, you have the honor to invite our first speaker.
Indeed, thank you a lot, Arsi, for your words and introduction. So, as I said before, we have almost 2 hours, a bit less. So after this session, there will be others more specific session on a specific topic, parallel sessions. You can get more detail on that in the general document of this planning of the day. But I'll say that so we know that certain topics that will arise during this conversation can go deep and deeper in these other parallel sessions that will take place after this general introductory session. So this first hour of the session, we will try to give time to our speakers to introduce himself or herself, but also to address the topics that are already in the table. So first, I would like to call Nnimmo Bassey, a very well-known activist, and I think he's architect and an author. He's really prolific author from Nigeria, and currently serves in Health of Mother Foundation. But before he was president of Friends of Air International. So Nnimmo, if you're there, please come to the stage. Thank you. Well, maybe Nnimmo is not here. It's not easy for me to see the list of participants since I am in my mobile phone, so with some limitations technically. So maybe we can switch to.
Sorry, Franco. He just wrote in the chat that he is not a panelist yet. So we need to.
Oh, okay. So maybe we can take your first one, Arsi, right?
Yeah.
Next one.
So while we are waiting for Nnimmo, I would like to invite Blanca Chancosa from Ecuador and the indigenous organization CONAIE, who she is also the co-founder of. She is an Ecuadorian indigenous leader of Quechua Otavalo nationality, and both co-founder of the Ecuarunari and the CONAIE. She has also written a lot about Sumaka Kavsai or Buen Vivir, that is the indigenous cosmovision of the Quechua people of the Andes. Please welcome Blanca Chancosa. Are you here, Blanca? I cannot see Blanca either. So maybe we will then fast forward to, or if Nnimmo is already a panelist. Here you are. Then we will just continue with you as planned. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi. I must apologize. I've been celebrating today, and because there's been a major decision at the appeal court in the Netherlands that the 4 farmers from Nigeria who sued Shell for pollution in their communities 13 years ago finally got judgment that Shell must pay for the pollution and for the damage that they've caused to the communities. Now, this has been extremely exciting. So you permit me if I get go overboard on this issue. Because this issue is extremely important because just recently, earlier this week, we have also heard about the children in Ecuador who sued who got a judgment that that the having gas flare close to them was an abuse of the human rights as well as a big impact, being a climate crime. And so looking at these 2 judgments, it reminds us that there is hope for struggle, that we must continue to work together against big colonizing industry, and to deconstruct the false narrative that the problems created by the market can be solved by the market, or that the false notion of nature-based solution to global warming can actually be used to speak about things being done to be in favor of nature and not things being done for profit. And so the issue that is primary to me, to us at this moment, is that the time has come, and I believe this social forum is a very critical space and time. Although we're meeting virtually, but we are bonding, we're getting together in the same direction. And it is the time now for all the neo-colonial structures that has kept certain communities as sacrifice zones to be openly discussed and held to account. It is time for for corporations who have continuously gotten away with ecocide to be held to account. And I think we have to go a step further, not just holding the corporations accountable, but holding the individuals who wield power behind the corporate shields. This is so critical, and I think this is the time for us to make that happen. One of the ways we believe this can gather steam is for us to actually have conversations about who does power belong to? What is power? And who holds the power? And the structures that govern our lives on a continuous basis, on a daily basis. Are those abstract structures, or are these structures that must be visible, must be led by the people, and must respond to what is important to people? These are very urgent and critical issues. And I dare say that at this moment, although the colonial racists, white supremacists, and all the other negative things, or the forces appear to be so powerful, together we can overturn them. And this is really the time, again, I repeat this, for us, especially using this platform, as we work together, wherever our geographies may be, is the same issue. We must overturn the forces that render others, the factories, to be exploited, that turns our environment to things that must be transformed for profit, that turns labor into something that is disposable, that turns humans into slaves, into machines, and being dealt with without any form of respect. I think the time has come for us all to stand up and say that we must move forward on the path of justice through solidarity. And the victory of the poor farmers against shell today, is a big signal that victory, no matter how long it's delayed, is coming. And this is the time for us to press for liberty, for our liberties, and for respect, for not just for humans, but also for the planet, and for all the social forces working for emancipation.
Thank you, Nnimmo, a lot for your initial words, very deep. And I think that we can continue, if she's there, with Blanca, that was already introduced, and then we've had another round.
Yes, I have not seen her. I think she has not come yet. So maybe we go forward with Lau-Kin Chi. Are you here?
Well, yes, I'm here.
Yes, thank you. Okay. I can make a brief introduction about you, and then you can take over. So Lau Qinqi is the adjunct associate professor teaching cultural studies at Lingam University in Hong Kong. She's also a member of the International Board of Peace Women Across the Globe, co-chair of the Executive Committee of Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives, vice president of World Forum for Alternatives, and founding member of Global University for Sustainability. Very warmly welcome.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be in this panel. And given the time limit, I will quote 2 cases of Japan and China, and then make a few brief comments. I think most of you have heard about the Fukushima, and it should not be forgotten only because it happened 10 years ago. So I would like to quickly share screen so that you can see the see some pictures. So here, 10 years after the catastrophe, we have still, you can see all these big massive tanks. There are now about 1,000 of them, containing 1.15 million tons of contaminated water. Next year, all the tanks will be fully filled, and the contaminated water produced every day for cooling down the reactors is 170 tons, or 62,000 tons a year. And there are now 13 million cubic meters of contaminated solid waste in more than 9 million black garbage bags stored in over 100,000 locations in Fukushima. At least 16,000 tons of nuclear waste need final handling, and they're expected to generate 10,000 tons of nuclear garbage. And after the explosion of the reactor units in the spent fuel rod pools of the reactor units 1 to 3, where the pile core meltdown had occurred, over 1,600 fuel rods are still there. And there is, although the Japanese government put up a timetable for removing those rods, then it might take 20 or more years to do that. So the pictures basically give you some idea of the kind of catastrophe we are facing, and despite all the pretentiously optimistic ways of dealing with the nuclear waste, we find that there is actually, well, no way to do anything much about this. But then the mainstream media mentioned this only in relation to the 2020 Olympic Games, or every year on March 11, on the anniversary day, you may see 1 or 2 reports about this disaster. So how bad is the situation? It's terribly bad. So we can see that man-made ecological catastrophes, they could in one moment wipe out the gains of decades of so-called progress and leave an unresolvable burden to many generations after us. The current interpreter from Spanish into Chinese, Huan Xiangmei, and also He Jixiong and I, we have co-authored a book on Fukushima in Chinese, which is going to be published in a few months. So the second case I'd like to talk about is China, about the pollution. China is known to be the emitter of the largest amount of CO2, but then where people enjoy the 40 to 60% of China's exported consumer goods, they should also be accountable to the CO2 emission. The World Health Organization's cancer report stated that China, with less than 20% of the global population, accounted for 30% of the world cancer deaths. The lung cancer mortality rate in China had risen by 10 times in the last 40 years.
Slowly, please, Kinchi. Slowly, please.
Yes. So as for the water pollution, China has very limited freshwater resources, and it has a per capita average of 25% of the world average. Worse is that there is serious pollution from industrialization and from industrialized agriculture. 20 years ago, 40% of the water from the 7 main rivers in China was worse than grade 5. That's the worst grade. 10 years ago, the situation improved a little bit, but still 20% of the water quality was worse than grade 5. The government estimated that about 300 million people in China, almost a quarter of its population, have limited access to clean fresh water. And the government had to invest about US dollars over 100 billion to decontaminate the environment. As for solid waste, in 2017, the total import, I'm saying import, not export, the import of solid waste in China was 48 million tons a year. But this decreased by about 50% in 2018. And this year, starting from this month, the government has imposed a zero import policy. So China, as the world's factory, has paid heavily in terms of people's health and people's lives. We are talking about not money, but lives. In the pandemic times now, more people are willing to return to the basics, that life is much more important than money. Of course, for the multinational companies, many of them is always the most important, as the lost lives are the lives of the dispensable people. So I will make some quick propositions. One is the fight for ecological justice cannot be separated from the fight for socioeconomic justice and vice versa. Ecological problems impact heavily and disproportionately on the poor and the marginalized communities, and on the global south with climate change, extractivism, and devastated environment. We need to question notions of modernity and linear progress, the so-called benevolent power of science and technology, and monetized notions of wealth and poverty. The notions of nature as natural resources and people as human resources must be rejected. We must struggle against not only neoliberalism, but also capitalism. And as capitalism cannot be divorced from colonialism and imperialism, with its Eurocentric facets in economic, political, and cultural arenas, the entire paradigm of so-called modernization, development, and progress must be rejected. Rejecting the exploitation of other species and of Mother Earth is part of this struggle. And who are the protagonists of these struggles? What kind of people's struggles are effective and lead to a different paradigm of hope for humanity and the planet? It can only be communities and collectives and not individuals. How do they conduct these struggles? Technocratic management by experts who serve the status quo will not help. Globally speaking, there need to be degrowth. Soumya proposed delinking as a national strategy for peripheral and semi-peripheral countries. I would add delinking as a strategy for communities, and the Zapatistas have offered a viable way through 36 years of struggle. 11 years from now, the Earth University and Global University are co-organizing a special panel on Zapatista visions, voices, and practices, so you can hear more from that panel. I hope Gustavo Esteva will tell us more about how do you see and experience the world as a we, as a collective, and recover and manage the commons, which include knowledge, techniques, affects, desires, social relations, languages, that is, what the community shares. There are many rich legacies on the ground. For example, in China, there are aspirations for new social relationships and new individual and collective subjectivities, which are legacies of the 1949 revolution. Hundreds and thousands of people have been part of the revolution, and many people keep the claims for justice and equality. In Japan, after the Fukushima catastrophe, we see community mobilizations of farmers, mothers, and citizens, not only for rehabilitation work, but also against nuclear power and nuclear weapons. We can all be making modest efforts to theorize and connect community experiences locally, regionally, and globally. I share what Francois Huttard had striven to promote, which is the common good of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lau. So I think that's, I mean, many things are arriving. I would like to encourage, I mean, the participants and also, of course, the audience to share her talk, her thinking. I mean, questions, comments, anything in the chat. We will have, I mean, the second hour. We'll try to introduce the comments, questions, and reflections that emerge. And of course, I mean, all these invitations, like the session that will take place, I think, tomorrow, that Lo just mentioned with Gustavo and other from Zapatistas movement and University of Air, Universidad de la Tierra, are important because, I mean, expands the possibilities of having conversations and deep understanding of on all the issues arising in this first general session. I think that we can go with our next speaker, Ariel Saleh. She's a very famous Australian sociologist who writes on humanity-nature relations, political ecology, social change movements, and I think the main broad topic is ecofeminism. And like Nnimmo and others in this panel, she's also a global Tapestry of alternatives endorser, GTA endorser. So I would like to give the floor to Ariel. Thank you.
Now, you hear me? Yeah? Thank you. We are indeed in emergency. 60% of biodiversity services lost on Earth, functions on Earth since 1945. The military, the world's greatest climate polluter, not acknowledged in climate assessments. The Sustainable Development Goals of the UN basically is the theorization of a subsistence perspective by German ecofeminists, which anticipated the current theory of degrowth. And myself, I came into ecofeminist activity through the anti-nuclear struggle, which Kinchi has very clearly outlined the consequence of this. In Australia, of course, we are a great miner of uranium, and we were exporting uranium, and we were mining uranium on indigenous lands, Australian indigenous peoples, First Nations. And in the late 70s, I became very involved in that. Also on those very lands, the British were testing nuclear weapons at Maralinga, which was impacting on our indigenous people. other ecofeminist colleagues, friends, comrades had been working in the Marshall Islands with Marshall Islander people who were impacted in the Pacific, impacted by US bomb tests, decimating their communities and a whole generation of Marshall Islanders. Other ecofeminist contributions would be the analysis of the European scientific revolution and how it legitimized, turned our understanding of organic nature into nature as a machine to be redesigned and perfected by men. And of course, we're living right now with the consequences of that obscene and absurd culture. In Ecuador, you had Action Ecologia, who conceived the notion of ecological debt as a response to 500 years of ravaging of their landscape and communities by Europe. And in Africa, South Africa today, or across Africa, we have a wonderful resurgence of women in the NGO called WOMIN, Women Opposing Mining and Extractivism across the continent. So that is what ecofeminism is about. And it's very grassroots. It's very transcultural. It's about the politics of life itself. So some of us have been working on climate issue and the fact that the climate footprint is sex-gendered. It's sex-gendered. The climate crisis is sex-gendered both in its causes and its effects. And this is where some of the ecological thinking about Western patriarchal civilization as fundamentally based on instrumental reason and instrumental manipulative relationship to nature, which Kinchi, of course, elaborated on very eloquently in her speech. The attitude that problems can all be resolved with a technical fix, and this itself involves a deferring of responsibility, end of pipe thinking, end of pipe solutions. And the same feminist analyses of climate have been looking at women's approaches to problem solution, which are quite different, epistemologically quite different, involving an approach through multitasking, an approach through concrete action. And I was just delighted a little bit earlier this evening to hear Britta from Sweden talking about the response to peace, actually, and COVID, by setting in motion a potato revolution, which would lead to self-sufficiency and enhanced community in Sweden. This is such a concrete action, such a typically ecological feminist approach. The emphasis here in ecological feminism is on reproductive labor, which is reproduction of in all forms. And again, this was introduced by Florence earlier this evening, who described the constitutional proposal for a green rule. And a green rule would mean that no proposals could go forward unless they were compatible with the notion that human action should only go as fast as nature can regenerate itself. And this brings me, I guess, to my final point, which is when you look at reproductive labor, when you look at regenerative labor, it's not the labor of mothers and caregivers in the home, it's the labor of farmers, or particularly organic farmers, and indigenous gatherers and fishers who are working with natural processes and who come to understand how human needs can be met while protecting nature at the same time. And this relates to something which Tord said in his contribution just now, that a class analysis, a standard socialist class analysis, which emphasizes only urban workers is not enough. We must be looking at the peasant class, and we must be looking at reproductive labour in the domestic sphere, because all of those groupings are keeping the infrastructure, the material infrastructure, everyday life maintained and healthy. And I call that a meta-industrial form of labour, and these people constitute a meta-industrial class. Meta in the sense that they are outside and beyond and embracing the rest of social functions.
Thank
So
you,
I hope-
Ariel. I have to tell you that your time is up.
One more sentence that I'll be happy to finish, which is that I've been very quick on ecological feminism, and there's a huge literature and history now, but it is unique and different from other feminisms in that it is transcultural and it is decolonial, intrinsically opposed to technocratic civilization, and offers a way, particularly the meta-industrial class notion, of unifying political struggles which have up until now often been separate and competing with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a very big fan of many of the ecofeminists that you mentioned, and also just a fun fact. The potato revolution you mentioned, or the potato appeal that we actually call it here in Sweden, Transition Network Sweden was part of launching that initiative, and we got actually over 200 communities uniting into that, putting potatoes and growing potatoes last year. So it was a very successful initiative after the corona crisis. So it was very fun to hear that, as I was part of organizing that as well.
So make cabbages next time.
Cabbages this year. So we will continue and inviting Patrick Bond from South Africa, activist and professor at the University of the Western Cape School of Government. And his work is primarily on the political economy of Africa, international finance, eco-social development, and political ecology, and development issues in contemporary South Africa. And he works in urban communities and with global justice movements in several countries. Very much welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very, very much. My dear colleagues and friends and comrades, it's just great to be with you. I'll take a different tack, especially if I'm allowed to share screen. Is that an option? Okay, great. What I'll do is quickly give you a sense of what I feel is a brand new danger, but I see Asad Rehman, and I defer to him because and also Dottie Guerrero, they're at the cutting edge of trying to make sure that the danger I want to talk about, which is the United States re-entry to the Paris Climate Agreement and to a neoliberal and corporate agenda. So if you'll allow me to share screen, is that something you can allow? It's still not, it's not quite allowing me. I know I have a reputation. They say it's that power corrupts, and Patrick's PowerPoints corrupt absolutely. Anyway, if you can share the screen, if it still says disable, it doesn't really matter. I can proceed without. I just wanted to alert you that what John Kerry and as the sort of climate czar, along with a few of the other characters that have come out of the Obama administration, but that they had a big influence on Joe Biden. And I'm still disabled. Is that a permanent problem? Disabled for share screen? I don't know if Franco, are you a guru of this?
No, not really. I don't know how to do that. Trying to do it in my cell phone. Maybe one of the others can try to do.
20th century digital immigrant too, I know what you mean. Okay, so I will just tell you what the debate looks like, because there's a lot of climate action, which is not in our traditions in the World Social Forum of climate justice. There's a lot of climate action discussions, and NGOs and some movements are celebrating what's happening with Joe Biden's executive order. So he's on January 27 put down some important statements. Let me give you the critiques indigenous environment network. By our principles, achieved through market-based solutions, unproven technology, as well short of what's needed and must be paired with serious plans.
Patrick, sorry, Patrick, we can't really hear you.
To stopping all drilling and fracking.
And now you are muted. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I think I was just kicked off in order to bring me back on, but I do appreciate that, because what I'll do very quickly, if you see Joe Biden and John Kerry, what I'll very quickly do is tell you things which I've been writing about. They're going to be on the web, on Counterpunch, for example, today. But it's particularly the danger of the net zero global emissions, right? And I'll just illustrate that with the carbon trading and the offset strategies. And I'm very worried the United States will exercise its leadership and especially align financial flows. These are some of the arguments. And just like Ariel said, military installations now are mentioned in this, but of course, without prejudicing the existing requirements, which are from the Paris Climate Agreement, you'll see none at all. They're still not under pressure to cut, and that's the single biggest emitting institution, the US Pentagon. And then the US will intensify international collaboration on innovation and deployment of technologies. And I do want to warn you that technologies from US multinationals are not free, they're not shared. And we're learning that with the COVID-19 vaccine and treatment, aren't we? Because next Friday, the WTO has a World Trade Organization, trade-related intellectual property system debate about whether there should be a waiver of the intellectual property, the monopoly tyranny of patents that these publicly subsidized and public good producing big pharma corps for vaccines in a country like this, where in South Africa, we've been hit very hard by a new wave and a new variant, and we still haven't got any vaccines in the country. And Canada, I don't know if there's Canadians in the house, but 5 times the number of citizens you have doses for. Now, that's the technology of the intellectual property regime that we in the World Social Forum community have always fought against. And in the AIDS case, to get generic medicines, we won. And the result is life expectancy went from 52 to 65 because of breaking through. But to go back to corporate neoliberalism and this agenda of the Obama years, and the Biden and Kerry, very much part of that, and Gina McCarthy, the other climate advisor, Obama sat with four of the sort of developing or emerging economies. There's Lula, you see Jacob Zuma, the South African president, Wen Jiabao from China, Manmohan Singh. And according to Bill McKibben, and I take this seriously, this is a league of super polluters, and they blew up the UN because they imposed unambitious and non-binding and no penalty, no accountability regime in the Copenhagen Accord. And most explicitly, this man, the main UN negotiator from the State Department in the US, the sense of guilt or culpability or reparations for the climate debt that the US owes, I just categorically reject that. So that's, I think, an explicit imperialist statement. Donald Trump was a climate denialist, but these guys in corporate neoliberal State Department and the Biden administration are climate debt denialists. And they do that along with what I would call a sub-imperial layer of international climate policy figures. And their agenda, this is the G20, they go to these meetings with one essential bottom line, which is to increase the ceiling from which their big industrial corporations and fossil fuel corporations can continue to emit. So no wonder we have no progress. So I'll just quickly give you what I believe are the reasons to delegitimize this process, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They have not adopted ambitious and binding global emissions reduction requirements, fairly distributed. They have not established accountability mechanisms. They are not doing the appropriate kind of carbon taxation. And indeed, they've endorsed, again, the failed carbon trading and offset gimmicks. They are not accepting the climate debt. The polluter pays responsibilities for the loss and damage and the compensation for the unused carbon space. They're not doing anything serious, although Biden is actually, this is one way that you can say he's making progress, a just transition. There's a lot of rhetoric in his new paper about that. Again, climate-friendly technology with...
Patrick, sorry, Patrick, to interrupt you. Can you speak a bit slower for the translation?
Slower, yeah. And the military, the maritime, and the airline emissions were ignored. And finally, fossil fuel owners were not told to stop exploring for new coal and oil and gas, and were not told to revalue unburnable carbon, stranded assets. These 8 fatal flaws, I think, are a good summary of why, as the greatest climate scientist put it, the Paris Climate Agreement is just bullshit. It's a fraud, really a fake, right? And the Green Climate Fund, which Hillary Clinton had promised $100 billion a year would flow through, plus other financial mechanisms, is essentially bankrupt, not just because Donald Trump defaulted, but very few funds are going in. The carbon trading strategy that Al Gore pushed into the Kyoto Protocol, even though he claimed Europe was making it work, you can see it wasn't. It was going up to 35 euros a ton to buy the right to pollute, to privatize the air. But then it crashed down to 3 euros a ton, and they've put it back up again in 2019. And because we have a global financial bubble, right, with Reddit and Robinhood and all these kind of funny games in Wall Street the last few days, we are still not at the point where the carbon markets are actually able to deliver the switch, the transfer. So to privatize the air as the offset, the net zero strategy, when you have these kinds of crashes, a 38% crash last April during the big COVID-19 lockdown collapse, and then 52%. Now it's come up a bit, but I would say the danger is that this follows the stock markets of the world. And so that means when the Wall Street Journal says carbon credits are one of the world's best investments, the world's best performing commodity is carbon credits. Please look at this film by Annie Leonard called A Story of Cap and Trade. It's a storyofcapandtrade.org, and you'll find in several languages the reasons that this is falling apart. We also have similar critiques, no time to get in, about carbon taxation the way it is being done now. In South Africa, a good example of absolutely tokenistic and inadequate, but you can see across the world, the pricing mechanism is exactly that, accounting gimmickry, right? To do net zero offsets that we'll see more of from the likes of Joe Biden and the Glasgow COP26. Last couple of slides. We know how seriously...
Patrick, really quickly, you have 20 seconds I give you.
And Archie, you'll be so happy, my last slide. This is just an illustration of how few countries, only 7, have decisively improved their commitments through the NDCs, right, to making the Glasgow summit a stronger one than Paris. In other words, nobody's taking this seriously, 7 countries. But my last slide, Archie, who's that? One of your people. And a couple of days ago, she said this, that the World Economic Forum corporates are creating new loopholes, failing to connect the dot, and building pledges on the cheating tactics. And what we need to do, she says, is increase the level of public awareness so our leaders can't get away with this, and make sure that their strategy, whoever is best at packaging and selling their message, is winning. That's their strategy for this status quo approach, that they lose in Glasgow. And I'm really looking forward to my dear comrades who tell us how that's going to happen. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And we will also have more discussion later about these topics. So now we have gotten the message that Blanca, you are here. Blanca from the indigenous organization CONAIE. Are you here? I saw you wrote the message on the chat. Or we maybe lost Blanca again.
Okay,
Sorry to
maybe
interrupt.
we
I see
can.
Blanca, but the host needs to make her a panelist.
Oh,
Okay. So
I think
maybe
that's done.
while we do that, maybe
She's
we
now
can.
here.
she's not here? Okay. So then we move on to the next.
Okay, I can take the next one.
Yeah.
Soumya Dutta from India. He is part of the South Asian People Action on Climate Crisis, SAPACC. That is a coalition of organizations and individuals that was formed in 2019 to bring together young women, farmers, workers, and people on the world that basically are concerned, like all of us, with the impact of the climate crisis. So, Soumya, if you want to take the role now.
Thank Franco, thank you, and good morning, good evening, whatever it is the time in all the places. I am speaking from the periphery of Delhi, where you might be knowing that there's a historic farmer struggle going on. This is the third month where more than 200,000 farmers are sitting on the streets of Delhi, blocking part of Delhi in the cold and windy and wet conditions. And this is one of the greatest news for this is they have identified that their struggle is not just with the government, but with the corporate who are trying to capture agriculture. So this is a good beginning, new beginning again for our struggles. I'll just focus on the species extinction part. But before that, let me tell you that in the climate crisis, when we have stopped talking about climate change long back. In fact, I remember in Cancun when we talked about climate crisis, and I wrote about that. A lot of my European friends said you are using an alarmist language. People will get put off. But today, I think we are taking this climate crisis. Just saying crisis is not enough. Most people are saying how severe the crisis is. And one more point that I want to highlight is a lot of people are depending on actually the IPCC reports or many other, like Indian government's Ministry of Earth Science came out with a report of climate assessment last year. But one of the major drawbacks or deficiencies, it might be intentional, it might be because lack of scientific capacity. There's no way to tell with certainty, but none of these are taking care of the feedback mechanism. And that's where the danger lies. We are already around 1.2 degrees Celsius above. We are at 412 to 413 ppm, where good science showed that we should be within 350, not beyond that. And these dangers have not been like Patrick also mentioned about the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is, okay, do as you like, that we all know. But the Paris Agreement and all other climate agreements and the action plans, these are being done keeping in view the reports of IPCC and other scientific institutions which totally ignore the feedback mechanism. And we know 3 of the feedback mechanisms at least have started working. So we don't have 20, 30 years. We don't have time to go and correct things. We need complete transformation. So with that, I'll not go into details of that, but let me go into the species extinction part, because this is one of the major threats that the world is facing today. In fact, most of you must have seen the IPBES report. There are countless other reports are now being produced. Ariel just mentioned one. It shows that only out of the documented named species, only from the documented named species, we are going to lose 1 million out of 1.5 million species that has been documented. And the scientists estimate there are something like 7 to 8 million species on Earth. But even now, what we are seeing, and this is another point that we want to really highlight, that the pandemic has created 2 different kinds of worlds. In most of the places, in the larger political society, in the general society, you see kill the virus, sanitize, isolate yourself, create social distancing. Instead of social solidarity, we have been using social distancing. Instead of understanding that we need to build immunity, we need to stay with all life forms, we are saying isolate all life forms, sanitize our environments. And this is going to be a major threat, because if we are already losing roughly 50% of our biological diversity, the species, the life forms, by this additional isolation, sanitization, kill the virus, kill the bacteria, kill the pathogens cries, and which is going on all over the world now, we are going to be in bigger soup sooner. On the other hand, we are also seeing another thread. This is a much smaller thread, but we have already seen this. A lot of people have started, a lot of groups, a lot of movements, struggles have started to understand that you cannot violate the living space of other species with impunity. You have to pay a heavy price. And we are seeing this awareness more and more, comparatively more in younger groups. And I have been taking a lot of sessions online, offline, and a lot of youth groups in India, in Bangladesh, in this region are now raising this question. Why did this pandemic spread like this? Why did it become a pandemic? The virus didn't come out and attack us. The virus didn't go from China to Italy and South Korea by wings. It do not have wings. It's our globalized economies and our imperatives of global profit that has spread the virus. It is our attack on the forest and other ecosystem and cutting down forests, going into isolated place, breaking nature's boundaries that has created the disease in the first place in humans. So this understanding, we can see there is a beginning of this understanding of groups. We need to act now to take this understanding to overpower the other understanding, other fake understanding of kill and isolate and sanitize, which is a very, very dangerous thing. And till now, we have been looking at biodiversity in a very, very anthropocentric way. Even when we talk about saving other species, we talk about, like when the IPBES report came out, a lot of people said, yes, a lot of these insects, and these are pollinators. I understand, I have to speak a little slowly.
No, you have only 1 minute left.
Okay. A lot of these pollinators, they are our major pollinators for our fruits and vegetables. So it's still an anthropocentric view. We don't understand that species extinction is not limited to animals only. 10 other human species got extinct in the last 2 million years. In the last 30,000 years, 2 other human species got extinct. And once there is a mass extinction, like we have started, it takes roughly 10 million years to create a reasonable biodiversity level, which you had before the mass extinction. So we are standing at the edge of the precipice, the edge of the abyss, and we have an opportunity of an increased awareness level. We must get onto this, and the new energy of the youth groups, new energy of farmer struggles that has given to many of us. We must, not only in India, not only in South Asia, where I work most of the time, but throughout the world, we must take this opportunity to drive home this message that we have to give space, enough space to all species. And it's not only the anthropocentric saving of animals and insects and birds. It's not only for our enjoyment, it's for the life. Life is very unique. In spite of our search for the last 70 years, we have still not found life in another planet or another place. So life is very unique, extremely precious. We must take this opportunity to prevent, to stall and reverse the species extinction that we humans have created. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And yes, very strong points and important about the anthropocentric worldview we are living in. Those are questions that I'm personally involved with also within the Rights of Nature network, both globally and nationally here in Sweden, as in order to have another story about how to co-live with our co-species here on the planet. So now we will again introduce Blanca Chancosa, and this part will be in Spanish. So for those of you who need English interpretation, you will have to go to move to the interpretation room. So you find that in the panel all the way down on the Zoom screen. And there you have, it says it's just next to the Q&A button. And very much welcome, Blanca. Bienvenidos, Blanca. Mucho gusto.
Buenos días desde Ecuador.
Good morning from Ecuador. I would like to welcome everybody.
salute you all the participants.
I am very happy.
I'm glad that even with the pandemic,
there are many friends
that I am meeting again with friends, with former friends and former comrades, but it's also nice to meet new friends and new comrades. We are in this fight for defending life. We've been, of course, following the situation of the climate, of the environment. What we see is that in the struggle to defend life, for us to be able to defend the tree, the water, this is also defending life. We belong to nature. We are part of nature. When governments have meetings about climate change, every year the governments come out of these meetings with no plan, with no solutions on how to diminish everything that's affecting climate change. On the contrary, governments have deepened the harm by giving out concessions for explosion of the resources, oil, forests, deforestation, gold extraction. They have been offending Mother Earth. The most affected one is water. We see how every time that we talk about oil rigs, oil tubes, all of them destroy water sources. Us in indigenous towns, we realize how rivers and water are the blood in our veins. We treat it as such. We cannot live without water. So if they make water sick, if they make water dirty, then the spirits of our grandfathers, the spirits of plants, of nature will also die, will also get sick. And this is what governments don't understand. For us, the water has a spirit, and so it is life for us. The mountain, the trees, they have life. They are alive. And they feed us through their energy as humans. That is why we have opposed to those activities. But defending water, defending nature has cost many lives. Here in Ecuador, they've murdered Jose Tendenza, Abusco Abisun. They were defenders of Mother Nature, of Mother Earth. In Colombia, we have also witnessed how many wise men who have defended Earth are dying weekly, are being murdered weekly. Many men and women from indigenous people in particular have died. We see that as well in Brazil, also in Canada now. People who die because they're defending their own territories. They've been criminalized and persecuted. For indigenous people, nature, the rain, the river, water, the mountain, they are not foreign. They are not a third party. It is us. They are part of ourselves. This is the relationship that we have between humans and life. That is why this is defending life itself. That's why we are worried. For indigenous people, all that we see in nature aren't resources. Governments have named them resources because it means goods, it means commodities. But for us, they are just another being. Even the rock has life. It's not a non-living being. They give us energy. They feed us through energy. So it's all interconnected. That's why we are demanding for a stop of extractivism, of mining, of oil extraction. Instead, the policies should be guided around the respect of life. We need to reconsider the concessions that they've made with water. Water is not just for those of us who live in the mountains. Water has to do a lot with people in the cities. People in the cities don't necessarily have water because there are pipes. We see how many forests who are cultivated for profit are draining water. This also goes for I'm sorry to interrupt you. You have a minute left. So we believe that we need to change that. This, of course, doesn't mean that companies and governments it's not enough that they are buying from other countries. They need to stop contaminating the environment. So all the countries, all the governments need to start looking elsewhere. We are the custodians of paramos, which are the source of water. During the pandemic, let's see who has fed the cities, who have been giving the medicine to the cities. It's us, indigenous people. We have been sustaining people through our work, through the work of little farmers. We are feeding people. Governments have only said, stay at home, wear a mask. And they have let off a lot of workers. But they don't allow for people who live on a day-to-day basis to find a way to feed themselves. So they're leading us to death. They don't have an alternative program for life. We do have an alternative program. We need to take care of the rivers. We need to stop mining, open ceiling mining. They need to stop occupying territories. That for us is respecting life. We have a right to live. We live together with other species. We cannot be seen as resources. They cannot be seen as resources. They are living beings. They are part of us. Thank you very much, Blanca.
Thank you. So I think that we have almost reached more than the half of the session. We will have one or two more speakers, and then we will introduce some questions from the audience and some reflections. So, Elsie, do you want to introduce Asad?
Yes, I will. And just before I let you in, Asad, I would just want to remind you that we have the Q&A button. And if you will submit your questions there, it's very easy for me and Franco to take it from there. So next speaker is Asad Rehman from the UK and War on Want and COP26 coalition. He joined the anti-poverty charity War on Want as its executive director in May 2017 and has been head of international climate at Friends of the Earth since 2009 and has over 25 years experience in the non-governmental and charity sector. He has also served on the boards of Amnesty International UK, Friends of the Earth International, Global Justice Now, and Newham Monitoring Project. Very much welcome, Asad.
Thank you, Archie. Sorry, I should have sent you a better bio than that boring bio. My background is in social movements, anti-racist, anti-globalization, anti-war, and of course the climate justice movement. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join so many amazing panelists, and I'm not going to repeat what many of them have already said. Look, we know we've been engaged in a struggle that spans the history of humanity, hundreds of years long, and you know, just in the last century, the struggles we've had in terms of the anti-colonial struggles, the anti-imperialist, and then more recently, the anti-globalization struggles have brought many of us to the climate fight against the climate crisis. And, you know, many of us have always tried to bring that anti-imperialist and that intersectional sort of frame to this systemic crisis and weaving together the stories and, of course, our solutions. And absolutely everything we ever predicted has come true. We are on the edge of catastrophe. There is a very big question of that hangs in the balance now, that of life itself. But, you know, we're at a critical juncture, and I think as movements we should be asking ourselves some very profound questions. You know, so much of our analysis and frame, as we know, is being co-opted by the mainstream and the elites. There was a time, even in the climate movement, when, you know, the word justice was something that was very much anchored in our analysis. Now it flies on the flags of and banners of many mainstream organizations, including UN institutions, who all claim, of course, that their approach is justice. And listening to all of the speakers, and particularly Patrick, I was reminded earlier late last year, you know, when I heard somebody say, COVID is exposing fallacies and falsehoods everywhere. Be that free markets can deliver healthcare for all, the fiction that unpaid care work is not work, the delusion that we live in a post-racist world, the myth that we are all in the same boat. Now, you'd think that those words would be coming from somebody of our movements, some social movement leader, some radical in the climate justice movement. Those were the words of the UN Secretary General. And it just shows how much, you know, they even recognize, of course, that there is a crisis of their neoliberal economic system and are attempting to use that to provide, of course, and argue their own alternatives. Now, Patrick put up that slide from Copenhagen, and many of us were involved in the fight then to keep temperatures well below 1 degree and argued very strongly that that should be the uppermost limit. And of course, since then, we've argued and fought for the 1.5, not as a safe limit, but as 1.5 to barely stay alive. Now, we could all see what the devastation of killer floods, droughts, famines, what it's meant for the lives and livelihoods of so many people all around the world and what it's doing to our ecosystems and to our planet itself. And late last year, you may have seen that the UN Environmental Programme, UNEP, published their emission gaps report and said we're heading towards at least a warming at the bottom at 3 degrees, but anything up towards 5 degrees. And of course, the mantra from mainstream governments and increasingly adopted by many even of the big NGOs is this mantra of the net zero 2050, both of course, ignoring the issues of science and equity and impacts, and banking on unproven technologies, banking on solutions that we know will be devastating to our ecosystems. And, you know, having this fallacy that somehow we can dial forward temperatures and at some point in the future dial them back without knowing what the impacts and the consequences are going to be. We know that the real goal has got to be real zero emission reduction by 2030 for rich developed countries. And we know that that also requires them to do their fair share. We in the UK, we've done that the UK, for its fair share of the carbon budget, would be at -200 by 2030. That would mean they would not only need to go to zero by 2030, but provide 1 trillion in financial transfers and technology, pay their climate debt to the global south. And that's just in mitigation, not in terms of adaptation, not in terms of the loss and damage, and of course not taking into account all of the historical exploitation through unfair trade rules and capital flows and tax havens and of course colonial acquisition that we've seen from India alone. British during their Raj, looted $45 trillion. And that was from India alone. And we know that capital expansion of the global north was based on the exploitation of both the people and the resources of the global south. Now, we're in a moment where the argument that we've had about those inequalities of racialized and gendered inequalities has become much more come to the fore as people recognize through the COVID pandemic the reality both within their own societies and of course between societies, between the global north and the global south. But I think COVID gives us a very good lesson in what the reality of the global response is going to be. We saw it at the beginning of the pandemic. Rich countries competed with poorer countries and for PPE equipment, for treatment, turned their back on the very countries that, that their unjust debt payments were leaving, that they were paying more in debt repayment than they were able to spend on their healthcare provision. And of course, the structural adjustment programs that we know devastated the public services of the global south, privatizing many of them. And now we're in a situation where the rich countries with 14% of the population have already bought over 50% of all the available vaccines that there are there, blocking access, as you heard, at the WTO for waivers on the vaccine. And of course, leaving the global south at best to be able to have a vaccine maybe in 2024, again, only if they are able to pay big pharmaceutical companies. And this is all in the backdrop of a crisis of inequality as well, where half the world lives on the equivalent of less than $5 a day, where we know hunger, housing, education and health are denied to the majority of people. Now, in that moment of this multiple crisis, it's not just us who are arguing for solutions. We can see already that the neoliberal system is already purporting and saying we have the solutions. If you look across in the World Economic Forum, and what have they called their conference this year? They've called it the Great Reset of Capitalism. When we look at what look at what's happening this year, it's a critical year of 2021 with both the G7, the COP26 and CBD. We can see the solutions that are being put forward in terms of, either a green recovery in the global north based on a huge expansion of material use. Where the OECD is saying it will be potentially up to about 180 billion tons by 2050. The sustainable level is closer to 50 billion. We can see that they're already saying that it'll be the market that will provide the solutions. At the COP, we'll see a push for carbon trading. We're already seeing the arguments about financialization of nature as the solutions to the crisis in terms of species extinction. So our challenge as movements is, we have to recognize we have not necessarily won, right? We have had victories, of course, amazing about the Indian farmers, are great about in Chile and our movements, and we have many, many different struggles that have been successful. But at this moment, when so many people are facing a crisis around jobs, where people will be holding on what little they have, how do we get to be able to dial forward and not them to dial backwards? And I think that's a really profound challenge. And I know many of us will be working on that. How do we connect our solutions? How do we have an alternative vision that is not just a vision, but actually has concrete policy solutions, from the work that people are doing on the Tapestry alternatives, that we're doing on the Global Green New Deal, that we can fight these fights together? Because I think there is a danger of our movements continuing to fight in their silos. And if we fight in our silos, I think we're going to face a decade of absolute catastrophe and loss.
Thank you very much, Asad, for those very powerful words. Very, very important points. Thank you so much. We are running out of time, and we just got one more panelist with us from India. Uma Shankari Naren, are you here? And please, yes, I see some of you have been starting to send your questions. We are hoping that we can get a little bit more time after Uma to have a round of questions. Welcome, Uma. You are muted right now. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Pasanen. Well, most of you might have heard of this huge ongoing current farmers' struggle in India. Thousands of farmers have, since the last 60 days, they have arrived and blocked all the roads to the capital of India, Delhi. Sitting there in the cold, day and night, having just two demands: to repeal the recent farm laws concerning the farmers and to enact a law which legally guarantees the minimum protection which they need. So actually, this struggle has been brewing since the last 2 decades, in fact. Since the time we signed the WTO agreement, moving forward to liberalization, privatization, and globalization paradigm, farmers have lost very heavily because subsidies have been withdrawn, not only within agriculture, but also in other sectors, pushing up the cost of cultivation in agriculture, but also the cost of living for the poor people. At the same time, agriculture prices being hitched to world prices have seen a lot of volatility, and therefore incomes have been steadily falling, and huge indebtedness which has pushed farmers to commit suicides in very bizarre numbers, like something like 300,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last 20 years. And so farmers have risen. For the struggle looks like for economic benefit, like the minimum support price, but actually it is also a crisis in ecology. We have several kinds of ecological crisis, in the sense the groundwater depletion is there. There is air pollution in the urban areas. There is pesticide and fertilizer poisoning of lands, and the disappearance of biodiversity, disappearance of species, and so on. And to put very briefly, the industrial chemical farming is not good either for the planet or the people of India. It displaces people, farmers. The farmers have very small holdings, and yet they eke out a living out of that. 140 million farmers are dependent on agriculture directly for livelihood, out of which 125 million farmers have just 1.25 acre of land holding to live on. And to open it up to the corporate, corporates to come and grab the land, as well as put the farmers to a free, so-called free open market without any protection, is disastrous for us. And that's why there is this huge struggle going on. I don't have, if I have more time, but I'll stop here so that you can have questions and other things.
Thanks, Uma, for your for your comments, really valuable, important. And yes, we will have another extra 30 minutes. So we will enter now on a kind of round of direct questions. Some come from reflections from the comments on the chat box. And we will request to the speakers to try to answer them really briefly. I know that some of these topics needs more time, but as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, this continues in a parallel session after this, so there will be more time to go deeper. So we request to use max 2-3 minutes per question, and I would like to ask directly to 3 of our speakers, Ariel, Patrick, and Lo, maybe the same question, some reflections around this issue that arises in the conversation in the chat. That is, I think about. I mean, what is the role? What is the role that you give to this is so-called green development, green capitalism, or Green New Deal? I mean, do you consider there are responses can really deep and important responses to the global crisis and the climate crisis come from there, from this the green stuff? In other words, I mean, if the solution are not coming from the market and neither from the state, so what is the role of this new fashion? So this goes to Ariel, Patrick, and Lo. Please, 2-3 minutes max. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I will go. Yes. Shall I go? Huh?
Yeah, go.
The origin of the Green New Deal, it was already cooked up a good 10 years ago at UN meetings. And in fact, Rio +20, I think they were talking Green New Deal, and then green economy emerged. And it was just another corporate charade. And it clearly collides with our interest in getting away from technocratic solutions, with our interest, with our critique of development and modernization, and with our desire to go local and eco-sufficient and live in harmony with the needs of nature as well. So I'm not impressed with the Green New Deal propositions. I think it's ticky-tacky, Band-Aid stuff. And I was quite shocked earlier this evening to hear one of the eco-socialists from Britain, I think it was, waxing lyrical about the Green New Deal. So we need to do some work in this area.
If it's my turn, I think I want to partly endorse dear comrade Ariel, because I think all of those eco-feminist socialist perspectives that Ariel has brought us take forward genuine economic justice. Ariel has this list of the ways debt has accumulated, and it seems to me if you don't put really central contradictions of capitalism right there, the way Ariel has taught us, then you're not getting anywhere near a just solution. Nevertheless, Ariel, let me fight you a tiny bit over semantics, because I see some of the most interesting struggles where labor movements, including some, strong socialist ideologues who understand that the climate catastrophe is an important part of their anti-capitalist analysis and their propaganda. And they really want to be involved. They want to figure out, how do you get deep into community feminist youth environmentalist struggles? And I love when I hear my old-fashioned Keynesian communist overlapping trade unions saying, how do we get the green part? And Ariel, I do think they will use Green New Deal. I mean, you heard Asad just throw it out, because the semantics aren't that cemented yet. And therefore, I've got a little bit more Catholic approach to bringing in a few of the ways ideologically we make sure that these are non-profit, bottom-up, united fronts with labor, with a class content, but that are profoundly informed by anti-extractivism and the kind of, eco-feminist socialist
But Patrick,
perspective.
they're not anti-extractivists. They're all plugged into an industrialized future. And we've already this last century has already demonstrated that you cannot have a global justice one based on an industrialized future. It's getting even worse now, of course, with the high tech, with the IT takeover.
Revolution. Yeah. Yes, so all of that's true. But as Sophia and as Barry Gills have asked, where do we get some World Social Forum coherence and ideological consistency? It's a great question that I certainly don't have an answer to. Look, I would even say that for 20 years, the World Social Forum avoided the kind of clarity that Ariel has asked for, that I endorse. So it does seem that we should be using this kind of space to hammer out what is a genuine, just transition, bottom-up, worker-driven, community-oriented, feminist-inspired with the consistency of rights of future generation for the youth. If we can get those ideological aspects and then start to judge the different ways Green New Deal. So if you'd like, I'll put my email again. We have actually 3 in South Africa, somewhat competitive, Million Climate Jobs, Climate Justice Charter, Climate Justice Coalition, competing exactly to do that. I hope they're going to all come together in a comradely, consistent way. But I think we need that all over the world, don't we? We need to rub across. I
totally agree. We need to thrash it out. But I think my colleague Ashish Katari has written a very good, from a decolonial perspective, critique of the Green New Deal concept. And I think it's very, very sound. Let's put that in the pot when we have this argument.
That link to us then, Ariel, or Ashish, if you're listening. Can't wait to see it. Okay, over to the next comrades.
Maybe can I come in? Okay, I think when we talk about green capitalism, I think is the I agree more with Ariel that you cannot have a capitalism that is green, just as you cannot have a capitalism that does not make any profit. So, or which isn't driven by greed and profit. So I feel that just now our panelist, Blanca from Ecuador, posed the indigenous approach very clearly and very compellingly. And so I feel that we have to look at what is capitalism now, and the core is the financialized capitalism. And now with Biden being the president, now we see the Wall Street also assuming more power.
Thank you very much. I have been asked to invite Ben Brahim from Morocco to say something, the leader of Social Forum, and he will speak in French. So
bonjour à toutes et à tous. Désolé pour
Good morning, everybody. Sorry. Thanks for all the invite me for the quality of the interventions from the panelists. 2019 is a year of mobilization, not only for social against the climatic change, and 2020 was also a year of mobilization to face the mobilization of COVID-19. I think about the two events in the time, and I ask myself, is that society, should we intensify our mobilization? But also, what can we and what we should do to take our roles to have not coming back to the old way, to normality, yes, but a new chance to a better world? That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does some of the panelists want to address this question? Asad.
Yeah, I think we can all agree. Of course, capitalism doesn't provide the answer. That's not the argument. And I think and we can all critique the word of the Green New Deal and recognize its very Anglo-centric framing, particularly in terms of the US, etc. I think the real question, and we all know that there are very different ways in which we can talk about that in terms of the eco-socialist framework, eco-feminist, a Green New Deal. I think the real question is in terms of how do we weave together a set of transformative solutions that are coherent, that recognize that question about limits and being anti-extractive, recognize our vision of sort of what kind of economy we want, a care economy. How do we guarantee people the right to energy and make those as public goods? How do we tackle the crisis of inequality and do that within a time frame of, you know, a decade in terms of making sure we prevent a breach of the critical 1.5 degree guardrail? And I think often, in our movement, we have analyzed how the neoliberal economic system, and I think Arundhati Roy puts it very, very well. You know, we all know that there are 1,000 different threads that need to be unpicked, and our movements try and pick those consistently. But how do we make sure that we use our power effectively on some of the key intersections that we have a chance of having some transformational fights and wins? And I think we have been, being honest, we've been on a retreat in terms of our many, many defensive fights. But how do we turn the defensive fights into an offensive fight and use the WSF to actually, as Sophia asked the question, how do we make sure that we are the movement of movements, that our power is greater than the individual fights? How are we able to connect our fights to local, to a global level? And for me, that's the question about the Green New Deal, or whatever frame we want to use. I think it's about what is in it and how do we build power for it.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
I have Blanca, I am going to ask a question and I would like you to address it. So you can also, after I ask my question, you can take what you want to say to reply to Asad. And yes, so my question is actually, what kind of solutions do we see that are powerful? Like, which kind of solutions can we have? We have mentioned ecocide, for example, ecocide law. What other and what does that mean? Like, we need one of the biggest problems we have is the anthropocentric worldview. So how can we actually battle that? And I would like to invite Nnimmo, Blanca, and Soumya and Uma to answer this. And I will give you, Blanca, to answer first.
¿Puedo intervenir?
Sí, Blanca, sí.
Can I talk now? 2 minutes. Thank you. Well, I just want to repeat that in the past World Social Forum, we joined our voices to speak up against impositions. In case of Ecuador, we joined a lot of signatures for our causes. We also talked about the debts that we have to the World Monetary Fund. Now we have to talk about issues such as water as a resource. Water is considered a resource and is becoming a commodity. So we can join our voices to talk about these issues at a local level, but also in the international level. There are many institutions where we can speak up, like the UN, for example, where we can be a single voice to protect water and the basic resources. Now, during the pandemic, we've seen how nature can regenerate, and that we can manage for this trend to continue. Maybe we can work so that governments can change their vision, so that we do not have to be on alert the whole time. Maybe we can speak up and raise awareness regarding economic topics as well. So this is a call for everybody to unite, to speak up together for our causes, so that we can have a common agenda, that we can develop maybe in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will give Nnimmo Bassey the word. And 2 minutes, please.
Thank you for those very generous 2 minutes. Really, it's so difficult when humans have to make decisions for how things go in the entire world, whereas we're just one of the species on planet Earth. But seeing that we're such huge predators, we really need to wake ourselves up to be more broad-minded, to understand that we are not alone. And I believe the first place we can do to operationalize ecocide, for example, is to re-examine the way we tell stories. Be able to learn to listen to the stories from nature, listen to stories from the various regions of the world, listen to the stories from the cities and from the rural areas, and seek some commonalities that will know that we are interconnected. And then we should ask ourselves certain beautiful concepts. We've been talking about green. I remember sometime in recent past, Asad did say that the solution is not as simple as greening our economies or having more electric automobiles or being more efficient in the use of electricity. It's something that is the struggle is about inequality. It's about neoliberalism. And the struggle is about economic justice. So sometimes when I think about these problems and the terms we use, especially in terms of climate change, talking about resilience building, talking about adaptation, what does it mean? What are we adapting to? When the world is investing more on destructive activities, you're having wars everywhere because of resources. You're destroying cities, destroying nations. So I talk about resilience. Where's the resilience coming from? So we really need to, I believe one of the things, and this is a very excellent platform, is for political re-engineering to ensure that people who call the shots are not called the shots. I mean, that's a military term, like military imagery. Those who call the shots are not the ones who have their fingers on the nuclear button. They are not those who are sending troops around the world, but are those who are actually building peace with nature, with human beings. And we should understand that even green technologies require the extraction of minerals like cobalt, lithium, nickel, and the rest from Congo DRC. And this is causing a lot of conflict. Children are being forced into the mines. There's a lot of gender conflict and abuse. And so we really need to re-examine where are we going as a people? Where are we going as beings on this planet? If we don't address that issue, it's still going to be the idea of man being the master of the planet, which we are not.
Thank you so much, Nnimmo. Soumya, would you like to continue?
Sure, thanks. I just have a comment on what Asad said. I agree, but the problem is all this green capitalism and Green New Deal, though it is Eurocentric, it's not just the thinking has pervaded even the others, even the other governments. So that's a major struggle that we are facing. But coming back to this question of how do you really get out of this anthropocentric worldview, and not only anthropocentric, putting humanity, Homo sapiens, as the center of the universe and everyone to be serving the humanity. I think there are two things that we are finding right now. Very briefly, one, that COVID pandemic has shown that what we thought ourselves to be all powerful, all overcoming, we are not that. We have many vulnerabilities and we have to coexist. The second major thing that we need to do, already a lot of groups are doing that in their own ways, and these networks are growing. I think instead of just saying what is bad, we need to redefine what is a good life. And those good pictures, real good life, do not depend on your having 3 cars. It depends on having a very clean, good environment where you can listen to the bird songs and enjoy fresh air, which we don't enjoy in most of our cities throughout the world. In fact, the WHO says some 60% of the world population breathes bad air. So if we can create this new narratives of what is a good life, redefine good life, and have this powerful messages going out, I think that will start changing which will be the beginning of a transformative change. And in this, my last word, I think the youth groups, I am coming back again and again, youth groups everywhere, in contrast to 5 to 10 years ago, they are starting to raise this question, starting to understand this, and we need to get in touch with them, connect with them deeply, and carry this forward.
Uma, would you like to continue?
Yeah, well, I would hardly even dare to address this question. I'm sure everybody is grappling with this, how to get out of this whole mess we have got into. While endorsing what others have said, I would say strategically we need to build a critical mass of governments, of critical actors and institutions. So once we build a critical mass, then very quickly changes can happen, and that depends on how we work on how to build that critical mass. Secondly, that has to be coupled with philosophies which are, and we have very rich resources in practically every religion. Well, certainly in Hinduism, putting down greed, opting for a simple life, ahimsa, the non-violence, and so on, can greatly help us to anchor ourselves both in grounded both in the philosophy as well as urge us to build this kind of critical mass. I mean, it is so difficult, we are used to thinking in a certain way and difficult to change so easily. Secondly, it is human beings, we create the world. I mean, in our own minds. After all, the human being, the other life forms, whatever world they are creating, we don't know. We can only create our own world. It is through our mind and through our thought process, through our conceptions, we create this world. And so we just have to work on ourselves and how to build a critical mass. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of you panelists and everyone who has been attending at this session. We have already reached our limit. We are already past our time limit. So we need to start rounding up. And I'm very happy that I have been able to be here, to be invited to facilitate this talk with you. Very many interesting and deep perspectives on the issues we are facing together. And even though many things can feel quite frightening and sad, I'm very positive with us coming together like this. And like Soumya Dutta said, we need to coexist. And thank you so much for me, and I will let Franco tell you some other things.
Thank you, Arsi. So yes, very quickly, because we really are out of time. Yeah, the same feeling. Thank you to all. And this continues. So we'll start the parallel sessions. We have 4 parallel sessions right now. One on system change and not climate change. The second on rural environmental struggles. The third on urban environmental struggles. And the 4th on local and global struggle to save the planet. All of the links are in the agenda and have been shared in the chat right now. And after that, there is a general assembly to close this session, this big session of the day, called the Assembly for the Ecology Space. And finally, I want to just mention the session on Zapatistas that was mentioned, and I was requested to mention it. It's called Zapatista Visions, Voices and Practices, and you will find it with that name in the program. It's tomorrow, 13. But you need to check the time for yourself. So that's all from my side, and thank you again. Thank you, Arsi, and thank you all the panelists for this great, amazing session.
Thanks, everyone.
So all of you will be able to see the recording of this online. So see you in the future.
Muchas gracias a todos ustedes.
Gracias,
Esperamos las
Blanca.
resoluciones y podemos
Thank you
continuar.
very much.
Sí. Bye bye. Gracias. Adiós.